love to say, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And just because you're going to mental health counseling does not mean you're crazy. I hate that word. You're not crazy because you seek out therapy. You're actually a normal human with normal human struggles. And you just need somebody to come partner alongside you and help you live life better.
Hello, I'm B. Reeves with New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly podcast, Finding New Waters. Our goal in creating Finding New Waters is to provide a resource for families to help navigate the complexities of supporting a loved one struggling with substance use or mental health. When we find ourselves in crisis due to one of these issues, most people have no idea where to turn. We hope to shed some light onto what is often the darkest hour for many families. Thank you. Sarah Coates, welcome to the pod.
Thanks.
Yes. You had me on yours not that long ago.
Thanks for that again.
Thank you. That was
Your little social clips, they just keep growing.
well,
People are watching it.
happy to do it, and anything that can help, hopefully
Yeah.
just one person. So thank you so much for the opportunity to do that. And for those who don't know, Sarah Coates is the founder and owner of 180 Counseling, which is a rapidly growing like a weed group of individual practices or individual therapists in a big practice. Is that about right? Okay.
Yeah, it's a large mental health company. We have 6 locations. We have around 100 therapists, give or take a couple. It's I started it in 2007, and it grew a lot, and then kind of held our status, and then COVID happened. Opened 3 more locations since COVID. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing. Outpatient mental health.
That's really cool. And so you've managed to grow during COVID, or did grow during COVID, not only growing in the number of therapists working for you, but you actually grew bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Actual locations. I remember during COVID, we had 60 therapists. And I just remember even during that time frame, just feeling I don't want to say pride, but just feeling so proud and humbled to be able to serve so many people with 60 therapists, because people were reaching out for mental health services by the droves, during COVID and right after that. And we had 60 therapists, and I was so thankful that we could make such an impact. And then fast forward a few years, now we have 100 therapists, 3 more locations. And so really just trying to grow our impact.
That's amazing. And so what do you attribute that growth to during COVID, and with especially the fact that you grew bricks and mortar?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly during COVID, everybody was at home, either fearing for their life or wondering like what is going to happen. And then you're at home, obviously the increase in substance use happened. Marriages, relationships were falling apart because people were stuck at home at each other's throat. I think people who had used busyness as a coping skill all these years, all of a sudden they had nothing to do but work or sit at home. And I think mental health issues just really came to the surface. But also, the media was talking about it. Social media was talking about, hey, help your mental health during this time. And we all needed it. So I think that just really leveraged my company and a lot of other companies to grow during the COVID timeframe.
Yeah. It seemed to normalize what was already somewhat becoming normalized, getting help.
Yeah.
And like you said, people, locked in a cage with each other. When people get used to that routine, and husbands, wives, families, used to the kids being gone, used to the husband and or the wife being out of the house. And then all of a sudden everybody's just stuck.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think after COVID, coming out of that, the kids were impacted a lot. I think adults for sure were, but these kids, I even see it with my children, and just the impact that whole COVID timeframe had. I saw this, I found this thing on my phone recently, and it was one of my kids had grabbed my phone during that time. It was a Snapchat like picture filter, whatever you want to call it. And she has her mask on, and she's doing like a little selfie, and she pulls it down and she says, COVID. And it was like replaying COVID. And I thought, wow, like to just consider that our kids, this generation, went through something so pivotal is just mind boggling to me. I don't know. It's just interesting.
It is. And it's funny, we're talking about it now. It's not like it's forgotten, but it also does seem like something that just kind of happened, which is funny how we can, the same way we're able to just get used to the COVID lockdowns and COVID is a reality back when it was a reality. We can pretty quickly get used to it not being a part of our lives anymore too, which was, I remember hearing, the consensus was, we think it's so hard to get used to the way it is now. It's going to be even harder to adjust when we're kind of free again.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. And so then again, these people that had certain coping skills before the pandemic, and then they weren't able to use those, and then now they're back to normal or trying to get pushed back to normal. It continues to perpetuate mental health struggles, I think, maybe in different ways.
Yeah.
But so people still reaching out for mental health services is still very, very great, which is good for business and great for humanity, because hopefully people are turning their life around, getting better, helping themselves.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and we just talked about this on another podcast briefly though. And it seems to have brought up to the surface to a boiling point stuff that was already kind of simmering. Yeah. And so and ultimately it's kind of like what we talked about on what I talked about on yours is, I had an event in my life that kind of accelerated and exacerbated what was already there. And it helped me get help and turn my life around. So hopefully that's happening for so many people that would have otherwise kind of limped by, been in denial, and not done anything about it until maybe something really bad had to happen.
Yeah.
And who knows what would have been the result of that.
Well, also, and then on the positive aspect, the people who, maybe their jobs dictated they were at home, and then all they had was some work to do, and maybe not a lot of that. And then they started doing new creative things that they never saw themselves doing, like people who wrote books during that time, and they were never authors before.
Right.
Or people who picked up a musical instrument,
right,
or a new fitness routine or whatever. So it is cool in a way that it did help some people kind of move in a different direction that bettered their lives. So I don't think the pandemic was tragic for everybody, certainly for a lot, but not for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, careful who I say this to, especially I was very careful, a couple of years ago, but I mean, I had probably the best year of my life in 2020 and 21.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case for everybody. So.
Right. For sure. And we can definitely be respectful for those who it wasn't. Yeah. But I know sometimes I even think, gosh, I loved the slowdown in a way, I appreciated that. Like, it forced you to slow down, but yet we were moving very fast too, because we were adding providers. I was set to open a location in April of 2020, and the construction was slowing down. Like there was just different bumps that we were hitting, and it forced the opening to be delayed until May. And I mean, March hit and everybody had to go home. And I was so thankful that we weren't launching April 1st because of permitting issues and all these things. Yeah. And so we didn't even open until the middle of May. But it was good. I was so glad for that.
So so how did you start 180?
I was actually a school counselor. And after I got my master's, I went to Campbell University, got my master's in counseling, was a school counselor for a number of years. Really enjoyed that because I loved working with kids. I knew it's what I wanted to do, was work with kids. But it wasn't enough counseling as a school counselor. There was a lot of testing requirements. I was doing disciplinarian stuff, administrative stuff. And I was like, this is not for me. So during that time frame, I sought out, obtaining my professional, at the time it was called licensed professional counselor certification, so that I could go into private practice and do private practice work. So I did all that during my school counseling time. And then once I was ready and licensed, I stepped out and just went into solo practice for myself. That was back in 2007.
Okay. And where was your first location?
In Garner.
Okay.
Little 600 square foot office. Me, myself, and my husband painted it out for me, put together the desk we got from Staples.
And are you still a practicing therapist?
I see a handful of clients. Okay. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor.
Okay.
It's certainly not my focus is not treating patients. It's obviously running a company. But I still have to keep my feet in the water.
Sure.
So I usually see a handful of clients a week. Not too many, but a few.
Yeah. And one thing I know that you talk about and this is something that is not just limited to people in recovery or people who are seeking help for, mental health conditions, but is just the concept of boundaries. And just let's talk about it for a second.
Yeah. I love talking about boundaries. I talk about boundaries when I do work with clients. And I talk about it with coaching clients because I do some business coaching on the side now, business mentoring. I love talking about boundaries with people. I think it's essential for healthy living, managing stress, managing yourself, especially in this society, in this day and age where there's just so many pressures. It's really important to have healthy boundaries. So I love talking about boundaries. What do you want to know?
Well, I mean, the way I look at it is my boundaries around work are probably not very healthy. And I don't know if I have to have too many other boundaries that I'm aware of that I'm sitting around thinking like, I'm not really sticking to the boundaries that I've set for myself in this one thing. I mean, work is, I try to have them, but the nature of the business is people need help. I don't ever want to just I'm never going to not answer the phone. There's just that. But what I do talk about a lot with families, with a loved one who is, needs help. And I always tell them, it's not for me to tell you what those boundaries are, but once you set them, if you don't hold them, then nothing's going to change.
Right. Yeah. But I always think of boundaries as like a property fence. I learned that example a long time ago. I'd say about a decade ago, I started really getting into boundary work for myself, my own therapy around boundary work, reading books on boundaries, really diving into, what is this? I think a lot of families don't teach boundaries in their families of origin. Maybe it's not even a phrase word, a buzzword that they even know. But I do think of boundaries as like a property fence. You think about your house, your backyard, right? So if you do, you fence in your backyard so maybe your dog can run free, your kids can play free without worrying that they're going to run into somebody else's yard or that something's going to come in and get them or affect, what they're doing in the backyard. So property fences for yourself is, protecting what is close to you, what is yours, keeping things out on the outside. So it's super important to have boundaries. So yeah, you're talking about boundaries around work life. We have boundaries in our relationships and our friendships, boundaries even around your own emotions or expectations or how you're navigating people and places.
Expectations is a word that, we all say it in a variety of different contexts in a given day, probably. But something I didn't know until pretty recently is, that I've heard it said, and I believe this, that expectations are resentments in the making, or expectations are premeditated resentments, because if I expect something to go a certain way and then it doesn't, then I get upset. Even if it exceeds them,
right?
It's almost I can be so sick sometimes that I have maybe some kind of expectation, and then the result is actually better, but I'm still, part of me is like, well, that's not what I was expecting, so I still don't like it, even if it's like the result even better than the result I wanted.
Like it kind of sets you up for failure in a way. I think we can have boundaries around our expectations for sure. I think that's actually hugely important. I also think communicating boundaries is pivotal. I mean, you can't read my mind.
Right.
And if I'm just assuming and expecting that you're going to respect a boundary that I've created in my head for you, then it's never been communicated. How are you supposed to know? So then when you cross that boundary and I'm ticked off, well, I didn't communicate and say, no, this, whatever the boundary is.
Yeah. And that's kind of goes back to the control, and even just the serenity prayer, accepting things we cannot change. And, but then when we want to kind of control things, when I first heard the concept of trying to control something with my mind, I thought that meant like, an evil genius sitting around trying to just, make things levitate and move. But it really just means, like you just said, I want everything to happen the way I want it without telling anybody what I expect.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing. Communicate the boundary. And then if someone disrespects your boundary or steps over the boundary, now you have a right to pull back, separate, whatever the case may be. I think about boundaries in like a work setting. If your boss says, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and you say, okay, but maybe my job description doesn't dictate that. Or remember, I already had this commitment on the books. I can't do this. And then they expect you to be there anyway and fire you because of that. That boundary's been very disrupted.
Right. And with families who are trying to get help for, let's say, their son, and they're still paying for him to live, and and he's living at home and still coming in, drinking and using, and I'm still very careful to never tell anybody what that boundary is, but it's pretty obvious that, hey, son, if you come home drunk in the car we pay for, you cannot live here anymore.
Yeah.
But then they say that and then they don't enforce it. Then it also almost makes it worse.
Well, I think people are afraid to set boundaries because they don't want to disappoint others. They don't want someone to hate them. And, definitely with teenagers, with family members who happen to be addicts or using, I definitely can understand how hard that is to hold fast to a boundary. Especially, I've heard people say, I don't want to put this boundary in place with my child who's an addict because what if they end up homeless?
Right.
What if they're on the street? If I tell them, X, Y, and Z boundary, and then they have to live homeless, or God forbid they take their own life. You're afraid of those boundaries.
Yeah.
So I can respect how hard it is to put boundaries in place.
I hear you. And I, on that note, I was talking to a mom the other day, and it reminded me of another mom I had spoken to, because this lady's got a son who's 20 something and she's supporting his life, and he's an addict in active addiction. Yeah. He's been, bleeding her dry for years. And she just said, basically saying, I'm afraid to do this because what if if I don't support him, then he's going to be homeless.
Yeah.
And then what? Then that's on me.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of this other lady I talked to probably 4 years ago. And one of her sons had OD'd, and her younger son was now going through it and needs help. And she was doing the same thing, supporting. And she said, I'm just worried I'm going to love him right into the grave. And I just said, please repeat that and listen to what you're saying, because that is exactly what you're doing. And that it seems like you're helping.
Yeah.
And even though intellectually, and they give lip service often to, I know I'm enabling this person, but they still do it because they just can't quite draw that line in the sand. Like I can no longer support this, and I have to leave the results up to, a higher power.
Well, for sure. And, I think boundaries are self-love and self-care. Again, I've not been in the shoes of a parent who's trying to make those tough choices. But at what point do you say to yourself, I love myself enough to set these boundaries? They're loving someone into the grave, but then where's the love pointed back to themselves to take care of their life that they're trying to live? That's a really hard place, when you're talking about your own kids.
But these parents deserve a life and peace.
That's
too,
what I mean. Yeah.
Exactly.
They deserve self-love and self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. That's such a hard spot. It's easy to preach about boundaries until you're in a very tough spot like that.
Right. I hear you. And I fortunately have not been in that spot. I've put people in that spot, I think probably, but I've never been in that spot myself.
Yeah.
What kind of, at 180, what are y'all seeing now that maybe weren't seeing before COVID, or even more recent than that?
We see tons and tons of kids and teenagers, the parents reaching out for therapy for them. So I just see that there's been a huge increase in teen mental health issues since COVID. And people can speculate all kinds of ways why that is. But, my theories on it: social media, huge problem. A great thing, also problematic, So teen mental health, I think it's impacted by social media. I just think the pressure that these kids are living in, I think about my kids the academic pressures, these going back to expectations, the expectation that you're going to graduate with a certain GPA, you're going to go to XYZ 4-year university. And that pressure is on a lot of teenagers, and that is not for everybody. And it shouldn't be for everybody, because diversity is what makes the world go round. And if everybody's graduating with a 3.8 and everybody's going to this Ivy League school or this 4-year university, where does that leave, everybody else? Yeah. So I think kids have a lot of pressure on them these days. Do
you feel like, as an organization, that the majority of these kids are going willingly, or are they kind of being dragged in by their collars by the parents?
Maybe some of both, but, there's certainly, that's the beauty of social media right here. So I said, it's problematic, but it's also very positive. And, kids are all over TikTok and wherever saying, my therapist said,
Yeah.
And so it's great because it normalizes reaching out to a professional to help you walk through a hard time. And, I love to say it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And just because you're going to mental health counseling does not mean you're crazy. I hate that word. You're not crazy because you seek out therapy. You're actually a normal human with normal human struggles. And you just need somebody to come partner alongside you and help you live life better.
Yeah. Garden variety human being.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I like that.
I just, I think about, I don't think I ever told the whole truth to a therapist from starting from the first time I went when I was probably 8 or 9 when my parents got divorced and, here and there throughout middle school and high school and just for, intermittently for about 20, 30 years, probably more. I don't know. And then once I got, sober, I saw a therapist for about a year after and was very honest.
Yeah.
But before that, it's amazing how much time and money I wasted just not being honest. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I'm sure that happens. Years ago when I was heavy in the weeds of practicing therapy, I'd have teenagers sit in front of me and I'm just thinking, you are so full of baloney. I can see right through your stuff,
What would you do? Would you call them out?
Sometimes, and then sometimes you've got the teenagers that are dragged in. And they just sit there, all grumpy and they're not going to speak. And I'm like, hey, you know what? Your parent already paid for the session. We could sit here and stare at our phones if you want to. If that's what you want. But so much of therapy with teenagers and kids is rapport building. You just got to get to a place where they do trust you to finally open up.
Yeah.
And not every kid gets there, but a lot do.
Yeah. And, on some level, just sitting there, even if they do stare at their phones, they could have left.
Totally.
And so there's some part, and that's how I feel about it when somebody comes into a treatment center.
Right.
They're not coming in shackles.
Yeah.
Even if they don't want to be there and they kind of, kick and scream a little bit, figuratively.
Yeah.
They don't have to be there.
Right.
On some level, they know at least a tiny part of them knows that they need some help,
Yeah. Yeah. And that someone loved them enough to bring them there or help them get there.
Yeah.
And that's the same, I think, on a teenage level. Coming into a therapist office is like deep down they know their parent cares enough that they took time off of work or whatever to bring them.
Right. That's a good point. I never thought about it like that because I certainly didn't think about it like that when my, parents were dragging me in to see a therapist.
And your therapist working with your 8 or 9 year old self, that person probably saw through it too.
I'm sure. Yeah. How old are your kids?
16, just turned 16 and 13.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you handle as a therapist and a mother? Are you able to kind of separate those two things or they complement each other or what's that like?
Both.
Yeah.
There are definitely times I can separate it and sometimes I can't, I mean, I'm still a human who makes parenting mistakes. And the one thing, for sure that being a therapist has shown me a lot of things. And again, working with teenagers all these years, back in the day, it's the same stuff. They're still doing the same stuff that they did 10, 15 years ago. It's just a different season. So there's a lot of times, my kids will say or ask or want to do things. And I'm like, yeah, I know the worst case scenario that can happen if I let you do that. And so I'm a hard no. And then yet I'm a parent and I'm imperfect. And sometimes I'll say yes and regret that I, allowed that. I would say that's probably the dark part of being a therapist is you've heard so much, all the gory, bad things that have happened to people.
Yeah.
And so then you're very protective of your own kids and not wanting them to spread their wings and fly for fear of whatever could potentially happen to them. I think that makes being a therapist parent very hard. But then on the flip side, also, it's very good because, I'm pretty adept at emotional intelligence and helping build empathy. And so coaching my kids along, I think they're great kids. And I hear them say things to their friends or to me, back to me. And I'm like, that's a therapist child.
Yeah. I love to hear that because I could see it, also being turned against you, like, I'm not your patient. I'm not your client.
Yeah. Certainly I'm sure I counsel my kids, even my husband, we have that joke every once in a while. Back in the day, he'd say, quit counseling me.
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm just practicing what I preach.
Yeah. So with the practice, you have 6 actual brick and mortar offices.
Yeah.
I know you're in Raleigh. You're in Wilmington. Where else are you?
We have 2 offices in Cary, one kind of on the way to the airport and one in Cary Apex area. And then we have 2 in Johnson County, one Garner and one in Clayton.
Okay. Yeah. We talked about the Clayton last time.
Yeah. And so, I definitely see the writing on the wall. I've got this map in my home office of North Carolina. I've got these little pin drops all over the state of where I think we could go into, and so I dream big, and we'll open some more offices.
Cool. I'm not going to ask where. I don't want you to.
I'm not going to spill my
IP. I don't want you to. The competition, they do listen. But that's amazing to grow like that, and so one argument or one view of it would be, oh man, that's so sad that so many people need help. But the thing is, people have always needed help.
Totally.
And thank God that it's more normalized, and there are so many more avenues to get it. And not just a proper brick and mortar or even on online therapist, but then there's anonymous ways. I mean, what are there? There are apps for it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that, I think that's amazing.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. My grandmother, she says to me often, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so sad that so many people need this help. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm also so thankful that we're in a position to try to make the impact we can in this area to help people, because, like you said, everybody, it's human struggles that we're dealing with,
Exactly. And like you said at the beginning, it's good for our businesses, but that's when people ask how that is, it's an awkward thing to answer.
I know.
But the thing is, when we're helping people, that's what's important, and whenever, especially when I first started in this field, had any doubt about what I was doing, because in, my form of recovery, when treatment centers popped up more and more, there was sort of, somebody be a two-hatter, meaning they're in recovery and work in treatment.
Right.
And the way I look at it, first of all, is I keep them separate. I always say this, I treat my job like I work at Sears. I don't even know if Sears is still open anymore.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I don't know. But my recovery is my recovery. My job is my job.
Right.
But if they can, complement each other, that's great. But they're separate things. Mm-hmm. But if somebody's going to do it, I want it to be people like you and people like me who are doing it for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. And this kind of brings me to another point I want to talk to you about. And we're so lucky to have 180 Counseling and people we like, know, and trust. We talk about this a lot at work. We really only send our clients because we just are the first stop along the way.
Yeah.
So everybody who comes in is pretty much an outbound referral. So we need places like you that we like, know, and trust. And sometimes we get somebody who's the wife or the son or somebody in the family, a loved one's done some research. Mm-hmm. And, we say, it's not that we don't like them or don't trust them. We just don't know them. So we just are very careful about that because it's more, and I think it's actually more important not only to know who we do like in the good ones, but to know the places to stay away from. Because unfortunately, like in any business, there are some bad players.
Well, for sure. I see it all the time. Just because somebody has a license doesn't mean they're ethical and proficient at what they're doing.
Exactly.
There's a lot of people who may have learned well from a textbook, but what's the actual practical application of what they're doing in therapy?
Yeah.
Just like anything, there's bad restaurants, there's bad clothing shops, there's bad mechanics, there are poor therapists, unfortunately. But what I love about the Triangle area, I think people in the Triangle, whatever level of service they're providing, be it outpatient mental health or inpatient or residential or what, there's a lot of collaboration going on in the Triangle, which is beautiful because it really helps strengthen the help that individuals living in this area can get, and I know for myself, if somebody presents to us and we're like, whoa, you need this service, we can easily reach out to some of the players in the area providing those services and help people get to the right place. And I think that's really amazing. Yeah,
you're so right, because I've witnessed it firsthand working with people like you in our area, but I've also seen it, the opposite of that in other cities where it is cutthroat. People don't want to help each other unless they have their little network, and people, they don't want outsiders. It's really sick. I mean,
it's sick. It's a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention what location we're in, but there's an area we're in and it's like that right now. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be in this area to help break that because that is not helpful for people. And isn't that why we all got into this? To help people?
Yes.
And if you're like not helping somebody get to the best treatment level that they need, and you're just keeping them close so you can make money off of them, or you're afraid you won't have another client to fill that spot if you send that person out, that's a terrible mindset and it's unhelpful. And that's the poor therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, and there's something so rewarding about being able, I mean, it almost feels better to me to be able to refer somebody out to somebody that that we like, know, and trust when, we, instead of what some people would do, I don't want to make, compare, but just to force it to force a square peg in a round hole, but yeah, I mean, and that there's a great feeling of just, hey, connecting somebody, call this person can help you, tell her I sent you for a faster response, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's funny. Some of these markets, they're not necessarily big cities. Some are bigger than others, but they just, for whatever reason, they are very insular.
Yes. Yeah. And I do believe we're all stronger together.
Of course.
When we're working together.
Yeah.
So,
that's
the cool thing I love about the way my practice has grown into is we just, we really rely on just the strength of diversity in the group, meaning we have all these different licensures. So we have psychologists, we have marriage and family therapists, we have social workers, we have clinical mental health counselors, we have addiction counselors. And so when somebody comes to our office, we're able to help them get to the right fit. And then among our providers, we treat kids, adolescents, adults, couples, families.
Yeah.
So we're really able to really help a lot of people in that respect.
That's a great point too. Just by the nature of having a lot of therapists, in your roster, nobody's ever going to be in that position of, so what are your needs? Oh yeah. Oh, I work with that, because we see that with people who just want a client and they will say that they're a marriage counselor when they're a addiction specialist.
Right.
Or whatever,
And they don't have training in that area. Yeah. And the other cool thing about my group, and I know some other group practices, they leverage this as well, is like, if I'm treating a couple and one party of that couple needs individual therapy, I can easily refer them to somebody in my group. And then now their kids need therapy. Okay, now we can refer them. It's just like, I don't want to say it's a one-stop shop, but you can keep it all within the family, so to speak. And everybody in that family system can get help. And that's really important.
Yeah. That's awesome. Y'all got an amazing program, and
we're trying.
Yeah, it's great. What do you see as like, not what's next, but are trends, not necessarily, not specifically with the demographic, but just what's like the latest thing that people are coming in that, is it gaming? Is it porn? Is it?
Probably a lot of those things.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know. I've been actually thinking a lot about how is AI going to impact our field? Because I see a lot of this stuff pass through now, like use AI to do your notes. And I'm kind of on the fence, like, should we do that or should we not? Like what's always listening? I mean, it's probably happened to all of us. You're sitting there with your phone in session and all of a sudden Siri's going off. I'm sorry, what did you just say?
Yes.
And you're like, oh no, it's listening.
Oh yeah, it's definitely listening.
I know. Always. And so I don't know. I'm trying not to be conspiratorial, but I'm like, what is that going to look like for the future of mental health, the integration of AI?
Well, actually, I saw a bit of 60 Minutes a couple weeks ago, and there was some stuff about AI therapy on there.
Really?
That they had I think they needed to kind of reboot before it was ready for prime time.
Oh,
but I mean, my personal thought is nothing can replace this.
No, telehealth can't replace this. Everybody was everybody jumping on the telehealth bandwagon back during the pandemic. It was a necessary thing.
Exactly.
Like we had to do it.
Yeah.
But then some people just stayed on that. And I think there are some, individual practitioners that can maintain a telehealth only practice. Certainly there's a place for some of that. But some of these big entities like mine, I mean, our telehealth stuff has gone way down.
Yeah.
I'd say the majority, 75% or greater of people who are calling our offices for new appointments, they want in person.
Yeah.
Because nothing can replace human to human energy and connection.
Yeah.
You just can't duplicate that over the computer screen. There's a place for telehealth. It does, it alleviates barriers and access. And in a pinch, my kid's sick, I can't leave to come see you, but I don't want to miss my therapy appointment. Fine. Let's jump on telehealth. But for the most part, therapy is all about the relationship. Carl Rogers, person-centered therapy. It's just the crux of it. And you just can't duplicate that human to human in the space, in the room energy.
I agree. And I just think there's something about, again, another concept and word that's not limited to recovery or mental health, but just the concept of willingness and being willing to drive to Six Forks Road to your office and get there 10 minutes early. And then, take enough time for, a 50-minute appointment out of the day instead of, rolling over in my pajamas.
Right.
And, hitting, camera on for Zoom. I mean, it's not nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than nothing, but there's something about the process of
the investment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is like investment and commitment to your own personal growth.
Yep.
And that does take getting in your car, leaving, going to do the thing. Also, I mean, I do this myself. The reflection time post therapy, when you're driving back to your office or your house or wherever. Yeah, you got traffic on Six Forks and you're navigating that. But for me, like my brain's always thinking and, just reflecting on, wow, these epiphanies I had,
that's a great point.
During my therapy session.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about this. I apply what we're talking about here just to, with meetings, recovery meetings, 12-step meetings during COVID. Thank God that we had them,
Yeah.
But after a while, and especially talking to newcomers about this, there's just something about the willingness to get in your car, drive to that church basement and go in and be awkward in front of a bunch of people you've never met before.
Yeah.
Because anybody can just lurk on a Zoom meeting. I mean, a Zoom one-on-one therapy session is actually, obviously way more, personal and requires more attention and all that. And you got to talk. But meetings, you can just go sit there and
lurk. That's a good word.
I mean, I definitely did. I mean, I got very complacent during COVID. I mean, I would like literally have a Zoom meeting on, playing golf, cooking. I'm not really that engaged. That's really checking a box.
That makes me think about what you were saying earlier about these kids. Are they willing to come into therapy, or is these teenagers willing to come, or the parents dragging them in? That's a valid point. Like, in order for real change to happen, there has to be a component of willingness.
Totally.
Willingness to commit to a new thing, invest the time, the energy to actually affect change within yourself.
Absolutely. There's an acronym, you've heard it, I'm sure, HOW, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And that is, when it can get very cluttered, all these things we're trying to do for self, but again, not limited to recovery or mental health, but just being honest with myself, about myself and to others.
Yeah.
And open-mindedness, open to try things, and then willing to do these things, willingness backed up by action.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Willingness. I like that. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's gotten me, that if nothing else, that was one thing I kind of, and it's sometimes it's willing. The most obvious is willing to get in that car and drive to that meeting or drive to that appointment. But sometimes being willing to not do what is going to be instant gratification. In my case, the obvious answer is willing to not drink or take a drug for immediate relief. But sometimes it was just, don't respond to that person right now. Willing to not do that thing, willing to pause, willing to pause when agitated,
Well, and you just said it, willing to not respond to that person. So going back to what we were saying earlier on boundaries, that is a boundary.
Yep.
This person is speaking unkindly to me or blowing up my phone, and I told them I couldn't talk right now. And this is so important for teenagers, I think, especially. It's like willingness to just put the phone down and set a boundary and say, I need some space. I need to go cook a meal. I need to do my homework, whatever it is. I need to attend to my kids. Those boundaries go, I think, with what you're saying in the willingness. Also, willingness to admit, and this is good for just general mental health, willingness to admit that I'm not okay. Like, I need some help with my marriage, or I need some help with this. Something keeps happening and I don't know what it is. So I need some willingness to get help to identify what is that. Maybe it's a trauma that keeps resurging.
And what we talked about on your podcast is just those 3 words, I need help. And it doesn't have to come to like full rock bottom crisis mode. I mean, honestly, also to that other point, to just maintain is, I need help all day,
Totally.
even if it's just a little bit.
Or every month. Like I have clients now. This is why I see a handful a week. They've been in therapy with me for years. We meet once a month. It's just this general check-in. How's your relationship going? How's work going? How's parenting going? How are you doing? Keeping up your health and wellness. Are you drinking enough water? Are you moving your body? Are you, in relationship with friends and family? And so just general check-ins. It's great. Monthly maintenance.
Yeah, exactly.
Staying ahead of, what might happen in the future.
Yeah.
That's the other reason to have a therapist, I think, in your back pocket, so to speak, because life is going to happen. You might be just sailing along just fine. And then bam, a tragedy happens, but you already have somebody you've been in a relationship with and who knows you. Yeah. And you can call them up and be like, hey, this bad thing happened. I need to get in now weekly,
exactly.
Twice a week, whatever.
Exactly. Because then, without that person in your back pocket that you've been talking to for all these years, then it's like, I need help. And then the person's, okay, so where were you born? The whole story.
Or 6-week wait list.
Yeah, that too. Exactly. Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah, it's important. Mental health. Therapy's for everyone. Everyone should have a therapist. Yeah. I just believe that. Yeah. Yeah. And you know what else I believe? You can have a higher power. I call that God for me. You can have God and a therapist.
Yes, you can.
There's a lot of religious people that think you shouldn't go to therapy because you should just pray about it. You have God on your side. Right. Well, that's true. And you need a human to connect with also.
I completely agree. Yeah.
A professional human.
Right. You're exactly right. And, but it goes back to the kind of the willingness too, because it's easy to say, well, Jesus, take the wheel. Yeah. But then we got to, faith without works is dead. We got to do the work. And the work often is meeting with a therapist,
Yeah. Doing your own personal work.
Exactly.
And growth.
Yeah. What do you, what advice do you have to people who are, either they kind of know, that the individual knows he or she needs help, or kids do, or the family does, or the relationship does, but they just don't really know what to do, how to take that first step?
Well, multiple things. They can, if they feel they can be vulnerable enough, they could quickly ask a couple friends, hey, I'm going through this hard thing. You ever talk to anybody about that? I guarantee you somebody in your friend circle, in your neighborhood circle has a therapist recommendation. Because so many people, it's normalized now more than ever. So many people have gone to therapy. So that's a good starting point. Ask someone, hey, do you know any good therapist? And they'll say, oh yeah. Or, my sister just went to this therapist. Here's this number, so that's good. Networking like that. Yeah. The other thing is Psychology Today is a great website, actually, I think, to find a therapist in your area. Type in your zip code, a couple of your issues, it'll pop up a whole roster of therapists in your area. Of course, if you're in the Triangle area or Wilmington or Johnston County, just call 180 Counseling.
There you go. Yeah. How do we find you exactly?
Oh, yeah. Our website is 180nc.com, and that's spelled out ONE80NC.com.
Awesome.
Yeah. And you can find out our information there.
Cool. Well, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you being on here.
Yeah, thanks.
This has been great. Sarah and 180 Counseling are an amazing resource for the community, not just here, but all over the state, basically, or at least the eastern part of the state.
We'll be over the state.
And exactly. They're taking over the state. So thank you so much.
Thanks
for
having me. Thank you. Thanks for allowing me an opportunity to share more about what we do. And we just appreciate the opportunity to be at this point in history, helping people in this area.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.